Have you ever awakened from every illusion, only to realize you no longer care about anything at all? It's not failure that breaks a person. It's when they finally have everything and nothing feels meaningful anymore. I once had a friend, wise, deep, someone who had read everything by Eckhart Tolle, Krishnamurti, and Alan Watts. After going through a dark night of the soul, she said to me, "I've seen it all. All illusions of success, love, the ego, have crumbled." 2 months later, I found her lying in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling. She no longer cried for not being good enough. She simply said, "I don't care what I do anymore." I thought awakening would ignite me, but all I feel is extinguished. This isn't depression. This is a phase rarely spoken about, when the soul begins to retreat inward to rebuild its entire operating system. In this video, you'll understand why awakening leaves us with such a strange emptiness. What's truly happening beneath the surface of lack of motivation, and how to recognize the quiet ember of a new fire rising from your soul. Before we dive into this journey, I just want to ask you one thing. Have you ever achieved something you once dreamed of, only to feel completely cold, entirely unexcited inside? If you have, you're not alone. And it's very likely you're stepping across the deepest threshold of the journey to authenticity, where the ego dissolves and the true self begins to speak. There was a time you thought awakening was enough. That one day, when all the masks fell off, when you saw the truth, everything would become clear, orderly, and purposeful. But it didn't arrive the way you imagined. It wasn't a radiant opening, but a quiet upheaval. Not enlightenment, but disorientation. Not fullness, but a strange emptiness, deep, cold, and unnamed. You realized the world that once captivated you was just a stage. The roles you used to force yourself to play, the goals you once chased, the validating glances that once made your heart tremble, all suddenly felt distant, foreign. You saw the repeating mechanisms within yourself, striving, achieving, disappointment. You saw the loop of desire, satisfaction, emptiness, and craving again, like a machine running endlessly just to avoid feeling. And then, after that penetrating clarity, all that remained was silence. At first, that silence felt sacred, like you just stepped out of a burning building, taking your first breath of freedom. But over time, that breath no longer felt fresh. It became bland. Life lost its taste. You stopped striving, stopped succeeding, stopped being compelled by anything. Not because you wanted to die, but because you couldn't find a reason to keep running. This is the paradox no one warns you about. That awakening doesn't always lead to fire, but sometimes opens into a vast, uninhabited land, where all that's old has collapsed, but the new hasn't yet emerged, where no one is there to guide you, and there's no longer a reason to go anywhere. You ask yourself, if this is the truth, why does it feel so empty? That very question is the first step of the real journey. A journey that no longer runs toward outer light, but turns inward, where there's no map, no roles, only a version of you dissolving, to make space for something unnamed to begin taking shape. There is a stage that no one teaches you how to survive. Not the heartbreak, not losing a job, or illness, or the death of a loved one. But the stage is where nothing happens. No more fighting, no more waiting, no more grasping at anything from the outside world. A prolonged and strange stillness, not peace, but drifting. A vague state between having seen everything clearly and no longer having any reason to go on. Carl Jung once called this the sacred space between the collapse of the ego and the birth of the true self. Liminal space. No longer the old person, but not yet knowing who you are. No longer driven, but with nothing left to resist. You stand there, as if your soul just walked through a storm that left no visible trace. No longer compelled by success, but not yet awakened to what true presence feels like. And the most dangerous part? You begin to mistake it for depression. You think you've lost yourself. You think you're regressing. But it's not regression. It's the necessary breakdown for something that's never existed in you before to finally have space to emerge. Spiritual awakening is not a celebration. It is a baptism in emptiness. No more desire, no more fear. No more familiar voices in your head screaming, I have to prove something. I must be faster, better, stronger. They fall silent. No more resistance, but no motivation either. You begin to feel like an empty vessel. All the ambition, dreams, titles, and goals that once kept you going each day suddenly feel like layers of dust on a core that no longer believes in them. A dismantling is happening, but because no one taught you about this, you think you're lost. Jung warned long ago, this is not decline. It's the necessary death of the old self to make room for the process of individuation to begin. Like a caterpillar in its cocoon, not resting, but dissolving into a shapeless liquid. Not yet a butterfly, no longer a caterpillar, a spiritual pupation, where all old forms must be destroyed so the new can be born. And the problem is, modern culture has no language for this. You were taught that if you don't have a clear goal, you're failing. That if you're not excited every day, something's wrong with you. That if you're not doing something, becoming someone, achieving something, you're being left behind. But Jung said the opposite. He called this stage the nigredo, the blackening stage in the alchemical process of psychological transformation. A necessary, even sacred, phase. Not because it's pleasant, but because it's real. You begin to realize your previous motivation never came from life. It came from fear. Fear of being left behind. Fear of not being seen. Fear of not making money. Fear of not becoming the best version of yourself. But when the light shines on all those illusions, you suddenly don't feel like continuing anymore. Not because you're hopeless, but because all your old reasons have been stripped away. The drive you once had was false. It was installed by a socially programmed ego. And now that ego has collapsed, you haven't yet learned how to live from something more real. That's why you feel empty. You're not falling behind. You're being recalibrated. Your entire internal operating system is being reset. What once fueled you every morning is gone. but the new fuel hasn't yet formed. The hardest part of this phase is you can't explain it to anyone. They'll ask, "What's wrong with you? Are you stressed? Did something happen?" But how can you answer when you don't fully understand it yourself? When the disruption isn't on the outside, but in the dissonance between your old self and the soul now rising. This is not clinical depression. Though it may look similar on the surface, fatigue, apathy, and disinterest. But on a deeper level, it is a sacred refusal. A refusal of the soul to continue living the old way. No more compromising with falseness. No more squeezing yourself into models of success, stable relationships, or goals you set before you woke up. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And the emptiness you're feeling is the beginning of that privilege." The real question is no longer, "What should I do next?" but rather, "Who am I when I'm no longer chasing any role at all?" The answer doesn't arrive in noise. It comes in silence. Not as an idea, but as a sensation. Vague, but undeniable. Like a gentle breeze, a voice from within. I don't want to go back anymore. I want to live truthfully. This is not the end. This is the beginning. But the beginning of a journey with no map, no external goal, no finish line. Only true living. Living from within, not for praise, not to be seen, not to become someone, but to live, because your soul whispers, now is the time to live truly. And that emptiness is the sacred space needed for that voice to rise. You once thought you were someone with goals, a hard-working person, someone who knew what they wanted in life. Maybe a dutiful child, a skilled employee, a talented artist, an ideal partner, a successful person in society's eyes. These identities carried you through many years. They told you what to do each morning, what to strive for, and how to move forward. They gave you direction, and also kept you trapped. Carl Jung called this the persona, the mask. Not something fake you deliberately wear, but a system of behaviors shaped by social expectations. They are the roles you learn to be accepted. And the danger is, you thought that was truly you. But spiritual awakening is the moment light pierces through all those roles. You can no longer believe in what once worked. You can't try the old way. You can't chase the old labels. You go to work, but it feels meaningless. You achieve goals, but feel no joy. You sit beside your partner, friends, family, yet feel like you're standing outside your own life. And then you start asking, if these things no longer make me feel alive, who am I? No one can answer that question for you, because it's not for the mind. It's for the deep core of your soul. You might try to return, try working again, try reconnecting, try to be normal again. But once you've seen the stage, you can't pretend to be the audience anymore. Once you've seen who you used to be, you can't go back to living that way. Not because you're incapable, but because you no longer believe in the old script. You're not lazy. You're not failing. You're not lost. You're shedding false identities to make space for the true self. Jung said, persona is not a mistake. It's a necessary step. You once needed that mask to belong, to be loved, to survive. But as your soul matures, that mask becomes too tight. And like a growing body, your soul can no longer live in the old outfit. Your sense of being lost is not from lacking direction. It's because the old self can no longer write the new story. You feel like an actor who has walked off stage without lines, without an audience. Not because you forgot the role, but because that role no longer fits a life worth living. Maybe you were once always capable, always driven, always knew who you were. And now, you sit in a quiet room, uninspired to do anything. Not because you lack energy, but because the source of motivation that once kept you alive has died. You no longer live to be approved, no longer work to be praised, no longer try to prove you are worthy. You don't want to return to the old cycle. But the new way hasn't emerged yet. This moment, though uncomfortable, unclear, sometimes painful, is the most fertile ground for the true self to be born. Carl Jung emphasized, the goal of life is not to inflate the ego, but to integrate it with the true self. That means the ego is not something to discard, but to restructure, to serve the soul. And this stage is precisely when the ego is being dismantled, to be rebuilt with truth, not with expectation. From now on, you will no longer be pulled by the applause outside. You will begin learning to listen to the whisper within. You will stop striving to be perfect. You will start living as someone real. And the real self needs no role, needs no reason, needs no validation. That real self only needs to live wholly, honestly, and presently. But don't rush to define the new form. Don't force yourself to find motivation. Because what's happening now is not a loss. It's a transformation. You are not broken. You're shedding the old skin to be reborn. And like every true metamorphosis, there will be pain. There will be loneliness. There will be disorientation. But also something very quiet and very real, beginning to take shape. Not a new idea. Not a better version. But you, unmasked, unpolished, no longer straining to fit in. That self won't scream, won't prove, won't need to succeed. That self will simply live. And the strange thing is, in that moment, you begin to actually exist, not as a role, but as a human being living from the soul. This is the point where many turn back, where they panic because all familiar sensations vanish, where stillness becomes too terrifying to bear, where the invisibility of the journey makes them think they're drifting instead of transforming. But what you're going through is not withdrawal. It is a sacred contraction, an inward condensing, where energy once scattered in all directions, seeking, performing, proving, now begins to retreat, quietly, deeply, like water pulling away from the surface to prepare for a flood of rebirth. Don't mistake this for collapse. Don't mistake silence for loss. Don't mistake not doing for helplessness. You're not lazy. You're restructuring. You're not regressing. You're landing in the center. Carl Jung once warned, modern culture has no language for stillness. It only understands growth. It only values achievement. It only worships busyness. A silent person is called lazy. A still person is deemed to be falling behind. Someone doing nothing is seen as a failure. But Jung thought differently. He knew true growth is not always upward. Sometimes it is a deep dive into darkness to retrieve the part of the self that's been lost for ages. You are there now, in that unnamed space. No foothold, no goal to reach. And perhaps your mind is screaming, you have to do something. You're wasting time. You can't just sit here. But your soul whispers, stay here. Don't rush. I'm not done with you yet. And this is the most important lesson of this stage. Stillness is not emptiness. It is preparation. Jung called it the chrysalis, the cocoon stage of the soul. The chrysalis does nothing. It doesn't fly. It doesn't crawl. It doesn't produce anything. It just melts. The entire structure of the caterpillar breaks down, so an entirely new form can emerge. The transformation happens in complete silence. No spotlight, no audience, no results to show. Only a sacred dissolution. If you find you no longer belong anywhere, that's a sign. If you don't know who you are anymore, that's a sign. If all the drives that once kept you going suddenly vanish, that's a sign. You are not lost. The old direction is simply no longer the way. This is when many make a mistake. They think they're going downhill. They fear being left behind. They cling to old roles. They try to force themselves to be normal again. But that's like forcing a melting caterpillar to crawl back up a branch. Impossible. You're not broken. You're changing form. From someone who lived by expectations to someone who lives by presence. From an ego that feared to a self that lets go. From a self that chased to a soul that knows how to return. And it's precisely when nothing seems to be happening that everything is. Silence isn't killing you. It's returning you to yourself. Look closer. Maybe you eat more slowly. Maybe you no longer force yourself to reply to messages instantly. Maybe you sit still longer and don't feel guilty. Maybe you've begun to hear your own breath. That's not loss of control. That's exiting the old control system. Not because you've lost motivation, but because you're learning how to live unconditioned. And in that stillness, if you're brave enough not to run, something will begin to speak. Very quietly, very truly. Not a voice in your head, but a soft pulse in your chest. A feeling, vague, yet clear enough that it cannot be ignored. That is the voice of your true self. No urgency, no demand, just presence. And what you need to do now is not do something to get through it, but to stay, to listen, and not to judge. Because you're not drifting. You're detaching from an old magnetic field. You're not dying. You're being reborn in the dark. And you're not alone. Anyone who has ever passed through this threshold has stood exactly where you are. Emptiness is the cradle. Condensation is the hand. Silence is the place where the true self begins to whisper, "From now on, don't live to be seen. Live to be felt from within yourself." There will come a moment in the midst of long days that seem meaningless, when no one's reminding you to try, no one's admiring you, no deadlines, no expectations, and yet you still feel something quietly shifting inside. It's not loud, not urgent. It's unlike any motivation you've known. It doesn't come from fear or pressure. It bears no shape of ambition. It doesn't push you forward. It pulls you back in. And then you realize the true self doesn't shout. It doesn't race, doesn't compete, doesn't perform. It whispers. Carl Jung called this beginning the emergence of the self. Not as a concept, but as a new operating system quietly installing beneath the old interface. What used to drive you, the restless ego, the demanding self-image, the fear of being left behind, has collapsed. But the new system doesn't arrive as a fast upgrade. It comes slowly, silently, in a way this acceleration-obsessed culture can't comprehend. The true self doesn't care what you achieve. It only asks, is this real? Does it resonate inside? Are you betraying yourself to do this? And you begin to feel a very different kind of energy. Not excitement, not enthusiasm, but a soft motivation, a gentle pulse, as if you're not doing something out of fear, but because you simply can't not do it. You start tidying, not to be neat, but because your inner space needs room. You write a few lines, not to share, but to keep something true. You decline an invitation, not to assert your autonomy, but because you don't want to show up halfway. That's when you know something has shifted. Something is alive inside you, without needing applause, without needing to be understood. Carl Jung had a term, enantiodromia, the phenomenon where something, once pushed to its extreme, transforms into its opposite. And this is exactly what's happening to you. From the ego's fury, I must do everything, achieve everything, be the best, to the soul's quietude. I don't need to do anything except live in truth with what's calling me from within. This isn't a loss of motivation. This is a new motivation, one that doesn't yet have a language. It no longer comes from goals. It comes from resonance. No more forcing, only authenticity. Others might look at you and say, "Why are you so slow these days? You've lost your fire. What's going on with you?" But only you know. I'm not slow. I'm walking in rhythm with my soul. It's not that you've lost passion. It's that you've stopped living for other people's gaze. This new urge, it's not a blazing fire that flares up and fades. It's a glowing ember, quiet, enduring, unprovable. And it is the most sustainable energy. It doesn't come from comparison. It doesn't come from fear. It comes from a deep promise made to yourself. I will not betray you anymore. From that moment, you no longer want to achieve. You want to become. You no longer try to do the right thing. You want to live as if the right thing is already within you. This shift will never earn you a medal. It's not flashy. It won't go viral. It won't make you stand out. but it makes you real. And that alone is enough. It is reason enough to go on. It is a new fire, small, but unquenchable. Eventually, you realize you no longer live by schedules. No more 5 steps to success, 7 days to change your life, or any formula from the outside world. You're no longer a mountain climber searching for peaks, but someone listening to a call from deep within the forest. Carl Jung called this the symbolic life, not living literally, but living deeply. No longer seeing everything at surface level, but as a sign. Everything begins to whisper to you in a different language. A rainfall arrives just when you feel parched. A bird appears the moment you ask, "Am I on the right path?" A stranger says something that wakes you up. There are no more coincidences, no more situations, only signals. You no longer ask, "What should I do next?" But start asking, "What is trying to be lived through me?" The old kind of action disappears. Not because you're passive, but because you now live like an instrument, allowing a deeper melody to play through you. You start trusting your dreams, not out of superstition, but because you know the unconscious is speaking to me through symbols. My soul is offering clues through images. You stop asking, "What do I want?" You start asking, "What wants to live through me?" That's not a sacrifice. That's harmony. No longer I with my separate goals, but I am part of something greater unfolding. When you live symbolically, everything slows down. You no longer reply to messages instantly because your feelings deserve respect. You no longer plan the whole year because some callings can't be scheduled. You no longer try to persuade others because you don't live to be understood. You begin working not because of deadlines, but because a stream of energy starts flowing. You begin writing, not to publish, but because not writing would feel like betraying something within. You say no without explanation because your body has already spoken. You live like a tree, not needing to move, yet every cell engaged in a dialogue with light, earth, water, and wind. Carl Jung once said, "We are not affected by what happens, but by how we view what happens." And when your perspective shifts from logic to symbol, life is no longer a battlefield, but a poem. But this isn't fantasy. It's not just let go and float. Living symbolically is not about rising. It's about rooting, not escaping reality, but stepping more deeply into it. Not fleeing the body, but understanding it as a mirror of the soul. And from that place, everything begins to carry meaning. Not because the world has changed, but because you are now present in every moment as a sacred being. Drinking tea, but as if speaking with yourself. Walking a road, but as if on pilgrimage within. Looking into someone's eyes, but as if touching a part of them no one's ever seen before. You will no longer live just to tick off a checklist. You live to listen for what's calling from the silence, and you begin to ask different questions. No longer, how can I make more money? But, what truly makes me feel fulfilled? No longer, how can I be loved? But am I staying with myself, even in loneliness? No longer. How can I achieve my dreams? But which dream truly wants to live through me? And from there, the actions you take begin to shift. They no longer need to be seen, no longer need to be praised, no longer need to be justified. They only need to be true to you. This is where motivation no longer comes from pressure, but from truth. No longer must do, but cannot not do. No longer success, but a deep resonance with something sacred alive within you. Life is no longer a plan. It is a quiet conversation between your soul and the world. And when you begin to live this way, slowly, perhaps misunderstood, with no one able to name what you're following, you'll know, in a way beyond explanation, I've stepped off the stage and into real life. The real life of the soul, unadorned, without a spotlight, but true. And only there can you truly begin to live. And then, after all those silent winters, after those nameless days in the void, after dismantling everything that no longer fits, you'll begin to feel something strange, a new stirring. Not the urge to race, not the hunger to be seen, not the fear of being left behind, but a quiet, deep, real pulse, like the drumbeat of your soul rising from the earth, inviting you to walk not for anything, but because you cannot not walk. No one is pushing you to live a great life, and no voice in your head is demanding you do something meaningful. But beneath it all, there's a quiet agreement within. I've sat still long enough. I've dissolved enough. Now it's time to live, but to live true. This new fire is different. It's not brilliant. It doesn't demand. It doesn't flare and burn out. It is calm, steady, enduring, like an oil lamp lit in a temple. Not for visitors, not for admiration, but because it is its sacred duty to shine. Carl Jung called this the self's motivation. A drive not from the outside, but from a source that cannot be fabricated. You no longer create to be praised, but because not creating feels like betraying life itself. You no longer strive to prove your worth, because you now understand that worth was always there. From this place, every action begins to transform. You work, not for KP is, but because the work expands your soul. You connect, not from loneliness, but because the connection nourishes your true self. You choose the difficult path, not to train yourself, but because you refuse to betray the deepest part of you. And strangely, you accomplish more, not through force, but because every cell in you is moving in the same direction. No more fragmentation, no more inner conflict, just flow. Not the fleeting inspiration kind of flow, but the flow of wholeness. Not needing recognition, not needing comparison, not needing certainty of results, only honesty with your inner rhythm. You begin to create, not to innovate. You begin to share, not with a content strategy. You begin to show up, not because it's right, but because it's the only way to still be yourself. And then, whether what you do is noticed or not, whether the world applauds or stays silent, whether no one can name the path you're walking, you still live, and you don't need anyone to validate it, because you've stopped living to become someone and started living because you can no longer not be yourself. That is the deepest freedom. And you know what? From that place, where you've stopped trying to impress, everything true begins to bloom. People come to you not because you're brilliant, but because you're real. Opportunities arrive not because you chase them, but because you resonate at the same frequency. Success comes not from strategy, but from the soul and the world finding harmony. Because when you step away from the stage, you finally step into life. No more performing, no more controlling, no more becoming. Only presence, and you'll realize, in that simplicity, there is a kind of achievement no metric can measure. You no longer live in betrayal of yourself. And that is enough. This is not the ending. It is the true beginning. Not the beginning of becoming someone, but of returning to the self that never needed to prove anything. And from that place, everything real. Love, creation, service, healing flows naturally like a spring that never runs dry. Not to impress, only to express the truth. If you've made it this far, if somewhere along this journey a line stirred your heart, a sentence touched that nameless silence within you, then you are not alone. You are being called home. Not to somewhere out there, but to the soul's home, where love needs no reason and existence needs no performance. I'm not urging you to change yourself. I'm not telling you to take action now. I only invite you. Place your hand on your chest. Close your eyes and gently ask, what in me is longing to be heard? If you feel called to write, then write. If you cry, let the tears speak before words do. If you fall into silence, that's okay too. As long as you don't turn your back on yourself anymore. And if there's someone beside you, someone quietly drifting after their awakening, a dreamer losing their light, a once blazing soul now covered in ashes, share this journey with them. Not to rescue anyone, but to say, I've been there too. And no, you are not broken. You are becoming something sacred. And if you want to continue this journey, if you want to go deeper beneath the ego's layers, if you want to explore the symbols, dreams, and signs of the soul no one ever taught you how to hear, then I invite you to stay in this space. Click subscribe, turn on notifications, not to not miss the next video, but to keep your inner flame alive, to remind you whenever you're lost, I'm not alone in the journey back to myself. And if you're ready, leave behind a whisper from your soul in the comments below. Even if it's just a sentence, a vision, a dream. No one is scoring, no one is judging, because this place is a temple of truth. Thank you, not just for listening, but for daring to live truthfully in a world that taught you to pretend. See you again on the road that leads nowhere, except back to yourself. And from there, everything true begins.